You hear the name Sándor Petőfi, and what comes to mind? For a lot of people, it's Hungarian poetry, it's revolution, it's freedom. But how does a real person, a butcher's son no less, become an icon? An icon so powerful that his story basically becomes the legend of an entire nation. That's what we're going to dig into. How a man becomes more than a man. How he becomes a symbol. If you want to understand Sándor Petőfi, you have to start right here, with this short verse. But listen, this isn't just a poem. Think of it as his personal constitution, a brutally honest ranking of what mattered most to him. Every single thing he did, every dramatic, life-altering choice he made, it all flows from this simple, unshakable set of priorities. So this code he lived by, freedom above everything else, it pretty much set up the central conflict of his entire life. It's this constant clash between his incredible capacity for love and his absolute, total devotion to an ideal. Let's take a look at how this unyielding code steered him through, well, everything. Now, you don't just wake up with a code like that, right? It doesn't come from an easy life. Before Petőfi could ever become a rebel for a nation, he first had to learn how to be a survivor. That defiant, take-no-prisoners character of his wasn't born in some comfortable political meeting. It was forged in the fire of real personal struggle. I mean, just picture this. Your family sacrifices everything, pours every penny they have into your future, all for you to have a respectable, middle-class life. Then, one single event, the Great Danube Flood of 1838, just washes it all away. In a flash, that dream is gone. He's forced to drop out, wandering the country as a broke traveling actor, even joining the army. It was these years of poverty and hardship that really tempered that unyielding spirit he became so famous for. And then, after all those years on the road, things start to change. His first poem gets published in the most prestigious literary journal of the time. He'd finally done it. He had his foot in the door of the literary elite. But for a guy like Petőfi, that was never, ever going to be enough. He didn't want a seat at their table. He wanted to start a revolution in verse and flip the whole table over. And you can see just how intentional he was about this revolution. It didn't even start with a poem. It started with his name. Dropping the Slavic-sounding Petrovics for the very Hungarian Petőfi was a huge political and cultural statement. Right from day one, he was planting his flag, declaring exactly who he was and what he was here to do. So what exactly was this artistic revolution? Well, you have to understand what poetry was like back then. The scene was dominated by this super academic, classicist style. Very formal, very complex, and honestly, kind of lifeless. Petőfi did something totally radical. He took the simple, clear language of everyday people, the language of the street, and shot it straight into the heart of high literature. And the effect? It was like a lightning strike, absolutely immediate and overwhelming. Poems like I Turned into the Kitchen felt so real, so authentic, that people could hear their own voices in his words. His stuff was so convincing that a lot of people actually thought they were real, original folk songs that he just found somewhere. Of course, with that kind of success comes fame. Big time. His editor, a guy named Imre Vahot, marketed him like a modern rock star. But that fame also brought controversy. At the height of it all, Petőfi published The Hammer of the Village, this comic epic that just brutally mocked the sacred classical forms that the establishment worshipped. And boy, were they furious. They attacked his language, calling it raw and rustic. So how does a rebel like Petőfi respond to the critics? Does he write some stuffy essay? No way. He writes another poem, of course. The Wildflower of Nature became his artistic manifesto. In it, he proudly declares that he's a raw, vital force of nature, not some delicate, artificial flower grown in a literary greenhouse. It was his final declaration of independence. I'm not playing by your rules. So he'd conquer the literary world on his own terms. For a guy like Petőfi, what's next? Well, his ambition just kept growing. For someone so obsessed with authenticity and freedom, a political awakening was almost guaranteed. And this is the part of the story where his two revolutions, the artistic and the political, start to merge into one single powerful purpose. But here's a twist. Right when he's at the absolute peak of his fame, around 1845, he falls into this deep, personal crisis. He was terrified of being trapped by his own celebrity, of being condemned to just churn out popular folk songs for the rest of his life. And this tormented state of mind led him to write The Cloud Cycle, a collection of dark, experimental poems that were unlike anything he'd ever done before. He comes out of that darkness with this new, laser-focused goal. And this is a crucial realization for him. A poet's job isn't just to look inward and dissect their own soul. No, a poet has a duty to serve a bigger, universal cause. His poetry had to become a tool, an instrument for political revolution. So during all of this, he's basically being guided by two stars. On one side, there's his great love, Julia Zendre, who inspired some of the most beautiful love poems you'll ever read. And on the other, there's this burning, unwavering commitment to freedom. And somehow, he managed both worlds perfectly, writing these incredibly tender love poems while at the same time organizing the radical young writers of his day. And then it happens. The day it all comes together, March 15th, 1848. I mean, this is it, the absolute climax of his entire life. His poem, The National Song, becomes the official anthem of the Hungarian Revolution. This was the moment. A poet's words, printed on scraps of paper and recited to massive crowds, literally changed the course of history. But you know how these stories go. From the highest possible peak comes the fall. And his was stunningly fast, incredibly dramatic, and it led directly to the tragic end of his life, and of course, the beginning of his legend. So after the revolution's initial success, the irony is that Petőfi's greatest strength, his raw, uncompromising honesty, became his biggest weakness in politics. He was just incapable of compromise, and he alienated people left and right. He suffered a humiliating loss in an election. He joined the army, but his rebellious nature meant he was constantly clashing with his superiors. Really, the only true ally he found was General Joseph Gam, another like-minded revolutionary. And then, on July 31st, 1849, during the complete chaos of the Battle of Segesvar, he just vanished. And this, right here, is the most important part of the story. His body was never found. That mystery, that total lack of an ending, is the exact moment the man dies and the legend is born. He becomes a hero who never truly died, a hero who could, maybe, one day return. So that brings us to the final, and maybe the most interesting part of his story, Petőfi's life after death. He became a kind of national canvas, and everyone who came after him could just paint the hero that they needed him to be. It's really fascinating, because his life and his work were so rich and so complex, every political regime afterwards could find something in there to claim as their own. The Social Democrats, they called him the first Hungarian proletarian. The nationalist Horthy regime, for them, he was the great national revolutionary. And the communists, they went all in with the slogan, "Our flag is Petőfi," turning him into a Bolshevik of his time. So how is that even possible? How can one person be all these different things to all these different people? Well, maybe the most accurate answer came from the man himself. He once wrote that he was, in both his virtues and his faults, the embodiment of the national character. He admitted that he carried all the contradictions of his nation inside himself, which made him the perfect, moldable symbol for everyone who came later. And all this leaves us with a really big, lingering question, doesn't it? When we take a real person with all their flaws and complexities, and we elevate them into a national symbol, a symbol that every generation reshakes to fit its own needs, can they ever get their true human face back? Or is their fate to just be a mirror for the nation forever?
Our podcast discussions are based on our ebook, Hungary's Hall of Fame in a Nutshell. History, literature, art, music, science, sport. Scan the QR code or check the link in the description to download your copy of Hungary's Hall of Fame in a Nutshell. As a special bonus, you'll also receive the Illustrated Companion, featuring over 100 detailed illustrations to visually enrich your understanding of the book's content. Thank you for watching.